My girlfriend and her daughter used me as an ATM for 10 years. I spent $105,000 on them. But when I found out, they put the deadbeat dad on the wedding announcements and excluded me completely. I kicked them out of my house and canceled the $50K wedding at a family dinner. Now they're destroyed and they'll never forget. I'm 42 years old, work as an operations manager at a logistics company, and after what happened a few months ago, I still have trouble believing it actually happened. Although at the same time, it was like the end of something that had been building for years, and I just didn't want to see it. The thing is, I was with my girlfriend Pamela for 10 years, an entire decade of my life, and during all that time, I basically supported her daughter Danielle as if she were mine. I paid for everything. Absolutely everything. And in the end, they treated me like I was a stranger who didn't even deserve to be at the wedding I was going to pay for myself. I guess I should start from the beginning so this makes sense. Because the truth is, looking back, I should have seen it coming. But when you're in the middle of the situation, it's different. You know what I mean? I met Pamela when I was 32 and she was 38. Danielle was like 13 at the time. And from the start, it was clear to me they came as a package deal. I mean, if I wanted to be with Pamela, I had to accept that her daughter was part of the deal. It didn't bother me at all, honestly. I always liked kids, and I thought I could be a good father figure for Danielle because her biological dad, Jeremy, was basically a ghost. He'd show up every 6 months or a year, promise her things he never delivered, and then disappear again, leaving Danielle devastated. Pamela was unemployed when I met her. She'd had jobs here and there, but nothing stable. And Danielle was studying at a public school that frankly wasn't very good. I made decent money. I'm not a millionaire or anything, but I have a good salary. So when we moved in together about a year into dating, I basically started paying for everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. The mortgage on the house was mine, utilities, food, clothes, outings, everything came out of my pocket. Pamela stopped looking for work because, according to her, she wanted to focus on being a good mom and keeping the house. Which I accepted because, well, everyone contributes how they can, right? Danielle was a good kid back then. Or at least that's what it seemed like to me. She got good grades, was respectful to me, called me Jonathan or sometimes John. She never called me Dad, but I didn't expect her to either. The problem was Jeremy. That guy was a complete deadbeat, worked whatever came his way, never had money, owed child support, he never paid. But every time he showed up, Danielle treated him like he was the greatest hero in the world. It was frustrating to watch. Like, I was there every day. Took her to school, went to her events, helped her with homework, listened when she had problems. But when Jeremy called or showed up out of nowhere, she'd light up completely and I'd fade into the background. When Danielle turned 18 and graduated high school, we talked about college. She wanted to study graphic design at a private university that cost an arm and a leg, and Pamela looked at me with those, "You can make this possible" eyes, and I basically felt obligated to say yes. I spent $40,000 over 4 years of college for Danielle, paid her full tuition, her books, in her dorm on campus the first 2 years, until she decided she preferred living at home, and I kept paying for her gas and food. I also bought her a car, a used Honda Civic in good condition, like a 2018, which cost me another $15,000. She never really thanked me. I mean, yeah, she'd say thanks when I gave her something, but it was more like an automatic gesture. I never felt like she truly valued what I did for her. Jeremy, meanwhile, didn't put in a single cent for any of this, literally zero, but he was still the perfect dad in Danielle's eyes. Danielle graduated like a year and a half ago, got her degree in graphic design, but didn't find work in her field. Basically stayed living with us without paying rent, without helping financially at all. And I kept supporting both of them. Pamela justified everything, saying the job market was tough, that Danielle was looking, that she needed time to get established. I was starting to feel a bit used. I don't know. Like we'd been together 10 years and Pamela had never made any real effort to get a job. Danielle wasn't contributing anything either. And I was basically the family ATM. But, well, you get used to things, you know? And I wanted to believe all that effort was worth it, that we were building something together. About 8 months ago, in December of last year, Danielle came home super excited and announced that her boyfriend, a guy named Michael she met in college, had proposed and she'd said yes. Pamela was ecstatic, crying with happiness, hugging Danielle, and I was happy too because, well, if Danielle was happy, that seemed fine to me. Danielle said they wanted to get married in August, specifically August 3rd, which was a date that had some special meaning for them or something, and they were going to have a big wedding. When she asked if I could help with the wedding costs, Pamela immediately said, of course, that I'd be happy to help. And I nodded because honestly, at that moment, I didn't know what else to do. I'd already been in this pattern of paying for everything for 10 years. Wedding planning started, and Danielle was obsessed with every detail. She wanted a designer dress, expensive flowers, an elegant venue for the reception, everything way above what I considered reasonable. I kept making payments, putting down deposits for the venue, for catering, for the photographer, basically financing this whole wedding that was going to cost easily $50,000 or more. In March, like 4 months before the wedding, I told Pamela I needed to know how many guests I could bring because I wanted to invite some friends and coworkers. The wedding was going to have 250 people, a massive event, and I thought 20 people from my side was completely reasonable, considering I was paying the entire bill. Weeks went by, and Pamela kept telling me she'd give me the list of who I could invite, but that list never came. I kept insisting, and she always had an excuse. That Danielle was still deciding final numbers, that Michael's family was very large, that they needed to prioritize certain people. One day in April, I was at work and my friend Jordan, who knew Pamela and Danielle because we'd gone out together several times, casually mentioned he'd received an announcement for Danielle's wedding in the mail. I was confused and asked him if it was an invitation, and he said, "No, it's just an announcement, one of those that tells you someone's getting married but doesn't invite you." He showed me the paper and sure enough, it was a formal wedding announcement with the date and venue, but no invitation included. The weird thing was, Jordan was on my list of 20 people I wanted to invite. I mean, I'd assumed he was going to receive an invitation because he was one of my best friends. But instead he got an announcement that basically said, "Hey, Danielle's getting married, but you're not invited." That night, I confronted Pamela about this, and she got all nervous. Started saying they'd had to make cuts to the guest list because Michael's family turned out to be bigger than they thought, and that unfortunately none of my 20 people had made the final cut. I stood there, staring at her, unable to believe it, like, are you telling me that I, who am paying for this entire goddamn wedding, can't invite a single person? She told me she was very sorry, but that's how things were, that Danielle had made that decision, and she supported it. I grabbed one of the announcements they had stacked on the dining room table and read it more carefully. It said something like, Pamela Garcia and Jeremy Torres have the honor of announcing the marriage of their daughter Danielle. And that's when I noticed another detail I'd missed before. My name wasn't anywhere on the announcement. The announcement listed Pamela and Jeremy as the bride's parents, as if Jeremy had played any real role in Danielle's life beyond showing up sporadically to disappoint everyone. I, who had paid for her entire education, who had bought her car, who had supported her for years, who was paying for her wedding, wasn't even mentioned. I asked Pamela about this, and she told me Jeremy was the biological father, and it made sense for his name to be there, that it wasn't anything personal against me. Things felt weird after that conversation, but I tried to let it go, although inside I was boiling. A week later, in May, Michael's parents invited us to dinner at their house to get to know each other better and talk about final wedding details. The 4 of us went, Pamela, Danielle, Michael, and I, to this huge house in a nice neighborhood where Marie and her husband lived. Dinner was fine, normal conversation, decent food, and after eating we sat in the living room having coffee. Marie started talking about the ceremony and asked who was going to walk Danielle down the aisle to give her away, and I automatically thought they were going to ask me to do it. I mean, it seemed logical after everything I'd done for her. Danielle lit up completely and said super excitedly that her dad Jeremy was going to walk her down the aisle, that she'd always dreamed of that moment, and it gave her so much happiness that he'd agreed to do it. Pamela smiled and nodded as if this was the most natural thing in the world, and I just sat there feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Marie looked at me uncomfortably. I think she did pick up on how weird the situation was, but she didn't say anything. I didn't say anything in that moment either, just nodded and kept drinking my coffee, even though I had a lump in my throat that made it hard to swallow. We finished dinner, and on the drive back home, nobody talked much. Once home, Danielle went straight to her room, and Pamela stayed with me in the living room. I was processing everything. I mean, not only were none of my friends invited, not only had my name been erased from the announcement, but also Jeremy, the asshole who hadn't put in a single cent for anything, was going to have the honor of walking Danielle down the aisle. I felt a mix of rage and sadness I didn't know how to handle. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that for 10 years, I'd been treated as a financial resource, not as a real member of this family. That night, I didn't sleep well. I was tossing and turning in bed thinking about all the money I'd spent, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the times I'd put Danielle and Pamela before myself. And for what? To be completely ignored and replaced by a guy who had literally abandoned his daughter repeatedly. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't had before, like something clicked in my brain and I knew exactly what I had to do. I told Pamela we needed to organize another dinner with Michael's parents because I wanted to make an important announcement about the wedding. She got excited, thinking maybe I was going to offer to pay for something additional or make some grand gesture, and she coordinated everything for the following week. And that week, I used my time to make some preparations. I contacted all the wedding vendors, the reception venue, catering, photographer, florist, everyone I'd hired and given deposits or advance payments to. I explained the situation and canceled all the services. Some refunded my money, minus a penalty. Others kept the deposit but weren't going to provide services anymore. I also went to the bank and withdrew all the money we had in a joint account Pamela and I shared. It was like $25,000 I'd been saving for the wedding and other expenses. I transferred everything to a personal account that was only in my name. I changed the passwords on all our shared accounts and made sure I was legally protected from anything they might try to do. Afterward, the day of the dinner at Marie and her husband's house arrived, and I was surprisingly calm. Everyone was there, Danielle and Michael obviously, Pamela, Marie and her husband, and also Jeremy had been invited, because apparently now he was an important part of all this. We ate dinner, talked about trivial things. Jeremy was bragging about I don't know what new job he supposedly had, and after dinner Marie suggested we make a toast to the couple. Everyone raised their wine glass and I raised mine too. I waited for the typical toasts about love and happiness to finish, and then I asked permission to say a few words. I stood up, raised my glass, and said something like, I'd like to make a special toast today. For the last 10 years, I've had the privilege of being part of Danielle's life. I paid for her complete college education, $40,000, bought her first car, supported her in everything she's needed, and of course, I was excited to contribute to her special day. However, I recently realized that my role in this family has been misunderstood. It seems my value is limited to being a financial provider and nothing more. My name doesn't appear on the wedding announcements. My friends aren't invited to the celebration I'm financing, and the honor of walking the bride down the aisle has been given to someone who's been absent most of her life. Everyone went quiet, staring at me. Pamela had her eyes wide open like she knew something bad was coming, and I continued saying, So, after much reflection, I've decided it's time for me to step back and let this family handle its own affairs. Effectively, as of this moment, I'm withdrawing all my financial support for this wedding. I've already canceled all the services I'd contracted and paid for, the deposits I could recover, I recovered, and the money that was left for the wedding, I've moved to my personal account. Jeremy, since you're going to have the honor of walking Danielle down the aisle, I suppose you can also. I have the honor of paying for the privilege, so I wish you all good luck with the preparations. The silence that followed was probably the most awkward of my life. You could feel the tension in the air so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. Danielle was the first to react. She started crying and screaming. How could I do this to them? That I was a monster. That she'd always treated me well and I was ruining the most important day of her life. Pamela was in shock, literally with her mouth open, unable to speak. Jeremy looked somewhere between confused and annoyed, and Marie had an expression I couldn't decipher, like between surprise and maybe a bit of respect. I simply put my glass on the table, thanked them for dinner, and left the house, leaving them there processing what had just happened. I drove back to my house, knowing that when Pamela and Danielle returned, things were going to explode completely. So I took advantage of that time to pack some of Pamela and Danielle's things in boxes Not everything because there was too much, but enough to make the message clear. They arrived like 2 hours later, and sure enough, they came in screaming. Danielle was crying hysterically, saying I'd ruined everything, that she didn't have money to pay for a wedding, that all the plans were canceled and she was going to be the laughingstock of all her friends. Pamela was yelling at me that I was selfish. How could I be so cruel after everything we'd shared, that this was a ridiculous tantrum on my part? I told them, as calmly as possible, that they had until the end of the week to pack their things and find another place to live, that this was my house. I paid the mortgage, and I wasn't going to keep supporting people who clearly didn't value or respect me. Danielle called me all kinds of names, said I'd never really been part of her family, that she'd only tolerated me because of her mom, but she'd always known I wasn't her real father. Those words hurt more than I expected, but at the same time they confirmed everything I'd been feeling, that to them I was just the idiot who paid the bills. 5 very tense days passed where they packed, and I basically stayed locked in my room or left the house to avoid more confrontations. That Friday they finally left. Pamela managed to stay at her friend Shirley's house, and Danielle apparently went with them too. That same day I hired a locksmith to change all the locks on the house. I wasn't going to risk them coming back and trying to get in or take things when I wasn't there. The house felt strangely empty and quiet after they left, but there was also a sense of relief, like taking an enormous weight off my shoulders. About a week after they left, I got a call from Jeremy, which I thought was hilarious because that guy had never called me in the 10 years I'd known Danielle. He started telling me we needed to talk, that he understood I was upset, but we couldn't let Danielle suffer because of problems between adults, that the wedding was important to her, and maybe between the two of us, we could split the costs so she could have her special day. I laughed in his face, like literally cracked up on the phone, and told him that not in a million years would I give him or Danielle a single penny. That if he cared so much about his daughter, he should sell his soul if necessary, but to leave me alone. I hung up and blocked his number. 2 days later, Danielle called me, this time with a less hysterical but equally manipulative tone. She told me I was making everything harder for everyone, that her mom was devastated, that she was falling into depression over all this, that Michael was considering postponing or canceling the wedding because his parents didn't want to contribute more money after the drama, and that basically everything was my fault for being vengeful and spiteful. I told her none of those things were my problem, that for 10 years I'd been the responsible adult while she and her mom lived, comfortably at my expense without ever showing real gratitude or really including me in their family, and that, now that I'd decided to set boundaries, they wanted to make me feel guilty. I also blocked her number after hanging up. About a month later, I received a physical letter in the mail. It was from Pamela, several handwritten pages where she basically told me I was the worst person in the world, that Danielle was in therapy for depression, that she'd lost the person she thought was the love of her life. How could I be so cold and calculating, and that she hoped someday I'd realize the damage I'd caused and regret it. I read the whole letter, put it back in the envelope, and threw it in the trash. I didn't feel a shred of guilt, honestly. The only thing I felt was that I should have done this years earlier. 2 more months passed. We were already in July, like a month before the supposed wedding date was, and I honestly barely thought about the whole thing anymore. I was focused on my work, going out with friends, enjoying my house and my space without having to support 2 people who didn't appreciate me. One day, Jordan called me, the same friend who'd received the wedding announcement, and told me he'd heard through the grapevine that Danielle's wedding had been canceled, that apparently they hadn't been able to get the money to reorganize everything, and Michael had decided it was better to wait. I didn't say anything, but inside I felt a satisfaction that probably makes me look like a bad person, but it's the truth. I felt like there was finally a real consequence for how they'd treated me. At the end of August, past the date the wedding would have been, I got a text from Pamela. It was short and said something like she and Danielle were moving out of state to start over, that they needed to get away from all the painful memories and start a new life, and this was her way of saying goodbye. I didn't respond to the message, just read it and went on with my day. A few days later, Shirley, Pamela's friend, contacted me on Facebook, trying to make me feel guilty, telling me I'd destroyed 2 good women because of my ego, that Danielle had had to go to the hospital for an anxiety attack, that Pamela was taking antidepressants, and that it was all my fault. I told her it wasn't my problem, and blocked her too. It's been like 4 months since I kicked them out of the house and 2 months since they supposedly left the state. I haven't heard from them again, and honestly, I don't care. My life now is so much more peaceful, and I have more money in my bank account than I've had in years, because I'm no longer financing other people's lives. Some of my friends have asked me if I regret how I handled everything, if maybe I was too harsh, or if there could have been a less dramatic way to resolve it. And my answer is always the same. I don't regret it one bit. The only thing I regret is having tolerated that situation for 10 full years instead of setting boundaries from the beginning. Does that make me a bad person? Maybe. I don't know. I suppose from the outside I can see how someone would say what I did was cruel, especially the part about announcing it at dinner in front of everyone and canceling everything right before the wedding, but I see it differently. I see it as finally putting myself first after a decade of being a complete fool who let himself be used. Danielle never saw me as a real father figure. I was just the guy who paid for things while she waited for Jeremy to show up to give her the emotional attention she supposedly needed. And Pamela never had any intention of being an equal partner. She just wanted someone to support her and her daughter while she played housewife. People tell me 10 years is a long time to throw away just like that. But those 10 years weren't thrown away in one day. They were eroded little by little each time my contribution was taken for granted. Each time Jeremy was put on a pedestal while I was ignored. Each time my feelings were minimized because I was just the boyfriend, while Jeremy was the real father. The moment at Marie's dinner was just the final breaking point where all that came together, and I said no more. But the reality is that relationship had been dead for years. I just hadn't realized it or hadn't wanted to accept it. Now I'm 42. Live alone in my house, that's completely mine. Have my finances in order with no one draining them. Go out with my friends when I want without having to ask permission or justify my expenses. And I'm starting to consider the possibility of eventually dating someone again, but this time with very clear boundaries from the start. Is my life perfect? No. There are moments where the house feels too quiet, and there are moments where I miss some of the good memories Pamela and I did have, because not everything was bad during those 10 years. There were genuinely happy moments, but those moments are no longer enough to justify everything else. The lesson I take from all this is that no matter how much you love someone or how much you invest in a relationship, if the other person doesn't value you and doesn't respect you, then it's not worth staying there. And setting boundaries doesn't make you a villain. It makes you someone who finally respects themselves. Danielle and Pamela probably tell this story in a completely different way. Surely I'm the monster who ruined everything over an immature tantrum, and maybe in their version they're right. But in my version, I'm the person who finally said enough after years of being treated like a wallet with legs, and that's the version I have to live with. And the truth is, I'm pretty much at peace with that.